Hi again guys, and welcome to episode 26 of Global Contenders, the review series for Gran Turismo's touring cars and also cup cars. Now, we touched on this concept in the Renault Megane Trophy video within this series for vehicles which aren't necessarily touring cars in a strict sense, but this is basically the closest match to those vehicles in terms of an overarching series. So they're not touring cars, but they're very close to it. Now, this vehicle, and a few others on the game as well, are the perfect example of that. A cup car. A cup car is commonly a one-make racing series, almost always a one-make racing series in fact, and they share very similar traits to conventional touring cars, say in the BTCC, ITCC, ETCC, etc, etc. Now, this particular vehicle is the Beetle Cup Car, as of course you'll have seen from the title, and I'm a big fan of the, in effect, road-going version of this car, the RSI Beetle. That being said, they are two very different machines. The road version, for instance, is all-wheel drive, whereas the Cup Car is front-wheel drive. The road version is also, funnily enough, more expensive, whereas the Cup Car is only 25 grand. So the value is potentially fantastic on this car, considering that 25 grand for a race car is dirt cheap. Now, this is not as powerful, unfortunately, as the RSI. It's not underpowered, but it's not as powerful. Now, that's unfortunate, and also I would have kind of liked it if this held the all-wheel drive advantage from the RSI and brought that over as well, but that's just not the case. However, being front-wheel drive isn't a bad thing. It does present some very distinct advantages in the case of this vehicle in particular. Now, the engine is a 2.8 litre, it's naturally aspirated, and you can tune up to 387 horsepower. It also puts out a pretty impressive 354 foot-pounds of torque, and due to the fact that it does not have all-wheel drive, among other things of course, it only weighs 1,078 kilos, which is quite a bit lighter than the RSI. The horsepower per tonne is 359, and the PP when fully tuned is, I would say, perhaps a little too high for the car's own good, but at the same time, understandably so. It is a race car, after all. 505 PP is the fully tuned level. And although, unless it's for one-make racing, I definitely wouldn't recommend racing it at that level, it can compete in, of course, lobbies that will allow you to use it at anywhere between, say, 425 up to 475 PP quite comfortably, not just with other Beetles, but also other cup cars, touring cars, or road cars, as I said, if the host of the lobby will allow you to use it. Now, another interesting thing about this model is that it can have NOS. There are very few race cars in any category on the game that can have NOS. There are some though, and this is one of them, and that is something to bear in mind. Now, many professional drivers, or those who consider themselves such, prefer not to use NOS. Personally, I couldn't care less about the use of NOS. If you don't want to, don't. If you do, do. It's something that's there, so you might as well make use of it. At the same time, I can understand why someone wouldn't want others to use it. It can seem like a bit of an advantage which other race cars may not have. In the case of one-make racing, well, that's down to the host, because at the end of the day, all of the cars can have it if you're all using the same car. Now, that being said, even without NOS, this is a pretty good car. Now, in the straight line, it's nowhere near as quick as the RSI for top speed, or of course, acceleration. But the handling, I would say, is better on this car than on the RSI. Of course, it can wheel spin, it can torque steer, and it has a little bit more of a tendency to understeer than an all-wheel drive car. But the lower weight, the racing aspect of its construction, and also the fact that it's more nimble, being front-wheel drive, does mean that I would give the handling advantage to the Cup Car over the road-going RSI. That's not too surprising though, given that this is the racing version. Now, the real question is, for 25 grand, which isn't that much, to be fair, that's like hot hatch money, is this worth checking out? Well, I would say yes. It's not the kind of vehicle that you would use all the time, but I would say that this car has just the right amount of useful features to make it worth checking out. The most important ones are, it's cheap, it has good handling, it's underestimated, and it can have NOS. Those are all very valuable assets to have. You can also change the colour of the car, as with most of the other Cup cars, and that is also to be noted, of course, as well. As far as the grand scheme of things and how competitive it can be, well, I already touched on that earlier. As long as you keep the PP lower, it's a pretty good car when you can use it. It's not a straight line machine. Fairly obviously, it's more of a cornering, twisty track, technical circuit kind of car, but overall, it's fun, it's cheap, it's pretty quick, and for one-make racing, as with all of the other Cup cars, it's a blast. So if you fancy checking out something that's obviously not going to dominate the touring car class or the Cup car class, but is interesting, and the kind of car which you may use for a bit of fun here and there, then you may want to check out this Beetle. But that's it overall for this particular pick. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.